The evening sun cast a soft orange glow over the quiet suburban neighborhood as the last rays of light began to fade behind rows of houses. Tasha sat on her front porch, sipping her tea, enjoying the peace that typically came with dusk. The gentle rustling of leaves in the trees and the distant sound of children's laughter echoed in the air, a reminder of how serene this place usually was. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other, where you could walk down the street and feel safe. But tonight, something didn't feel right. Tasha's instincts were on edge. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach. It wasn't the first time she'd noticed something unusual, but tonight she couldn't shake the sense of unease. Across the street, the home of her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, stood in darkness. Tasha had always kept an eye out for Mrs. Thompson, who lived alone, especially after dark. She'd often checked in on her, made sure she was safe. So when she spotted a shadowy figure sneaking around the back of the house, Tasha's heart skipped a beat. Her breath quickened. Someone was breaking in. Without thinking, she reached for her phone and dialed the police. The dispatcher answered after a few rings, and Tasha's voice was steady, though her pulse raced. "I think someone is breaking into my neighbor's house," she said, trying to keep her words calm. "I saw a man with a crowbar. He's at the back door." The voice on the other end sounded bored, detached. "Ma'am, are you sure? You said you saw a man with a crowbar?" "Yes, I'm sure," Tasha replied, glancing nervously at the house again. "He's trying to break in. I'm looking right at him." There was a pause, followed by a soft chuckle. "Okay, ma'am, we'll send someone out. But you might want to double-check things before you go jumping to conclusions. It could just be someone messing around." Tasha's brow furrowed. She wasn't imagining it. Her heart raced even faster, but she tried to stay calm. "Please, I'm serious. He's armed. This isn't a joke." Another chuckle, this one a little louder. "Sure, ma'am, we'll send someone your way, but we've got other calls. You take care now." Before Tasha could respond, the line went dead. She stared at the screen for a long moment, confusion and anger rising in her chest. The calm that had settled over her neighborhood just moments ago was gone. She could still see the man outside, getting closer to the door, but the police, the ones she trusted to help, had just brushed her off like she was overreacting. Tasha's stomach churned. How could they dismiss her so easily? Tasha stood at the window, her heart pounding as the man continued to move around the back of Mrs. Thompson's house, his crowbar flashing in the dimming light. Every instinct in her screamed that something was horribly wrong. She couldn't just stand there, but her mind raced with frustration. The police had laughed at her, brushed her off as though she didn't matter. She paced back and forth inside her small living room. Was it because she was a black woman calling in? She bit her lip, trying not to let her anger boil over. She had seen it before, heard it from friends, neighbors, even family. The way authority figures often dismissed the concerns of black people, especially black women. But this was different. This was her neighborhood, her community, and she wasn't going to let anyone dismiss her when she knew something was wrong. She grabbed her phone again and dialed the police once more. The phone rang longer this time, and when the dispatcher finally answered, her voice was flat, almost uninterested. "Police, what's your emergency?" "I just called about a break-in at 1754 Oak Street," Tasha said, her voice firm. "I told you, there's a man breaking into my neighbor's house." "Yes, ma'am, I remember," the dispatcher replied, a slight edge of annoyance in her tone. "But as I said, you may have been mistaken. Our officers are pretty tied up with other situations." Tasha could hear the officers in the background, laughing and chatting. She felt her throat tighten. "No," Tasha insisted, feeling her words rising with urgency. "I'm not mistaken. I'm looking at him right now. He's breaking in, he has a crowbar. Please, this is serious. You need to send someone." There was another long pause, followed by the sound of faint laughter from the other end. "Ma'am, look," the dispatcher said, "I understand you're concerned, but maybe you're overreacting. Not every shadow you see is a criminal. It's getting late, so we need to focus on the bigger calls. We'll get to it, but you might want to relax. People around here get a little jumpy at night." Tasha's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to hang up and call someone else, anyone who would take her seriously. But she knew that wouldn't help. There was no one else who could stop what was happening right now. Please, Tasha said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Someone's in danger. My neighbor's in danger. You don't understand. You have to help. There was another pause, followed by a dismissive sigh. All right, ma'am, we'll send someone out, but it's not going to be immediate. The line went silent for a moment, and Tasha felt as though the room had gotten smaller, as if the walls were closing in on her. The man outside was getting closer to breaking in, and she was helpless. What else could she do? A few more seconds passed before the dispatcher spoke again, her voice laced with mock sweetness. Thanks for your call, ma'am. You have a good night now. Tasha could barely breathe. How could they just dismiss her like that? She looked out the window again. The man was almost at the back door. He had to know someone was watching him, but instead of retreating, he took a step closer, almost daring her to do something about it. Her hands trembled, but her mind was clear. She knew what she had to do. Tasha grabbed her coat, threw it on quickly, and stepped out the door. She wasn't waiting around anymore. If the police wouldn't listen, she would handle this herself. She wouldn't stand by while someone's life was in danger. As she stepped into the chilly night air, her heart raced, but determination steadied her. She wasn't backing down. She wouldn't let anyone, not the man outside, and certainly not the dismissive officers on the phone, make her feel small. This wasn't just a break-in, it was her community, and she was going to protect it. The street was eerily quiet as Tasha made her way toward Mrs. Thompson's house. She kept to the shadows, moving carefully so the man wouldn't see her. Her eyes stayed locked on the figure who was now at the back door, prying it open with the crowbar. Every muscle in her body tensed, and her heart pounded in her chest. Tasha stopped at the corner of her neighbor's yard, hidden behind a thick bush. She could hear the faint creak of the door opening, as the man slowly forced it further, each movement deliberate. He was clearly experienced, and he knew exactly what he was doing. Her breath caught in her throat. She had to do something. She wasn't about to let this man hurt anyone, especially not Mrs. Thompson, who was in her late 70s and lived alone. Tasha's mind raced, trying to figure out how to handle the situation. She needed to act fast. The man stepped back from the door for a moment, looking around, and that was when Tasha realized her opportunity. She pulled out her phone and texted the few neighbors she knew well. She explained the situation quickly, telling them to be on alert and that the police were still not responding. But her phone vibrated almost immediately, and it was a response from one of her neighbors, James. "Stay put, we're coming," was all it said. Tasha's breath steadied slightly. At least someone was listening, but she couldn't rely on anyone else to act quickly enough. She needed to make sure Mrs. Thompson was safe, and she needed to stop the man before he got inside. Tasha moved forward slowly, closer to the back door. She watched as the intruder disappeared into the shadows for a moment. He had entered the house. Her stomach twisted, and for a second she considered running back to the street, but something deep within her held her in place. She couldn't just abandon the situation now. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. Suddenly, the man's voice echoed from inside the house. He was speaking, but Tasha couldn't make out the words. A chill ran down her spine. Was he talking to someone inside? Was Mrs. Thompson already trapped? She clenched her fists. The last thing she wanted was to get caught up with an armed intruder, but there was no other choice. If she stayed hidden, she was risking Mrs. Thompson's safety. She couldn't be a passive observer any longer. Tasha's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from James. "Tasha, we're almost there," James said breathlessly. "Just hold tight. Stay hidden." But Tasha was no longer thinking of hiding. She was already moving toward the back door, her eyes sharp as she peered around the corner. She wasn't going to wait for the police, who'd already shown they didn't care. She was going to make sure the man knew that someone had seen him, and that he wasn't going to get away with this. The back door creaked open just a little more, and the man stepped outside again, his crowbar in hand. His eyes swept the yard, but they didn't reach the bushes where Tasha was crouched. She took a breath, stood up, and called out in a clear, strong voice. "Hey, get away from the door." The man whipped his head around, startled. His eyes locked on Tasha's, a flash of surprise crossing his face. For a brief second, there was confusion, as though he hadn't expected anyone to confront him. But then, something colder and more calculating replaced it. "Who the hell are you?" the man growled, taking a step toward her. Tasha didn't back down. She squared her shoulders and met his gaze head-on. "I'm someone who's not going to let you hurt my neighbor. You'd better leave right now, before I call the police." The man sneered. "Call the police? What, you think they'll help you? They didn't even take your call seriously, did they?" He laughed, taking another step forward. Tasha felt a pang of fear but refused to let it show. She had no choice but to stand her ground. She wasn't letting this man intimidate her. "Just go, leave now," Tasha demanded, her voice steady. The man paused for a moment, studying her. Then, with a mocking grin, he raised his crowbar again, as if daring her to stop him. But before he could make another move, a distant siren sounded in the night. The man froze, looking back at Tasha with a new look of caution in his eyes. The siren grew louder, and within seconds, the flashing lights of a police car appeared down the street. The man's eyes darted nervously between Tasha and the approaching police car, and then, without a word, he turned and ran. Tasha stood there for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest, watching him disappear into the dark. The police car skidded to a stop near her. Two officers jumped out, one of them holding a flashlight. They rushed toward Tasha, their faces full of confusion. "Are you okay?" one of the officers asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "What the hell was that about?" Tasha stood tall, her breath still quick, but her voice unwavering. "He was breaking into my neighbor's house. I saw him, he had a crowbar. I called the police earlier, but you didn't listen to me. You laughed at me." The officers exchanged glances. The second officer seemed uncomfortable, but the first one, who had been speaking, frowned and shook his head. "Look, we don't have time for this," he muttered, waving her off. "We'll handle this, you should go inside." Tasha stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "No, you don't get to tell me to go inside. You didn't take me seriously when I called. I had to confront him on my own. Maybe you should think about why I had to do that in the first place." For a long moment, the officer said nothing. The second officer shifted uncomfortably, looking from Tasha to the street. "I'm just doing my job," the first officer muttered, clearly irritated. Tasha didn't flinch. So was I. The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers. Tasha's bravery had traveled fast. People who hadn't even spoken to her much before were suddenly knocking on her door, thanking her, praising her for what she did. But she didn't feel like a hero. Not yet. The fear and anger from the night before still weighed heavy on her chest. Later that day, she received a call. A detective wanted to speak with her, in person. When he arrived, he wasn't like the others. Detective Harris was older, quiet, and carried himself with respect. He listened as Tasha recounted everything. How she'd called, how she was dismissed, how she'd confronted the intruder, and how the man had run off only when the sirens came. When she was done, he sat back and let out a long sigh. "That man you saw," he said, "we've been tracking him for weeks. He's wanted for a string of break-ins across the county. Violent ones. Last time, a homeowner ended up in the hospital." Tasha's heart dropped. "He could have hurt someone, or worse," she whispered. "He could have hurt you." Harris said seriously. "You were incredibly lucky, and brave." She nodded, but her stomach still turned. "None of this should have happened. I reported it. Twice. But they laughed at me. They ignored me." Harris looked her in the eyes. "I know, that's why I'm here." He opened a folder and pulled out a document. "We're launching an internal investigation into how the call was handled. I've already listened to the recordings. The way they dismissed you, it was unprofessional and wrong." Tasha looked down, her hands clenched in her lap. A part of her was glad, but another part, a deeper, more tired part, wasn't surprised. Because this wasn't new. "I don't want anyone fired," she said softly. "I just want them to listen next time. To believe us. To believe women like me." Harris gave a slow nod. "I understand." As he left, she stood at the door, watching the detective walk back to his car. Then something happened she didn't expect. One of the officers from the night before, the younger one, stepped out of the passenger seat. He looked nervous. He approached her carefully. "Miss Green," he started. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I should have spoken up when my partner brushed you off. I saw the report this morning. You were right, and I was wrong to stay quiet." Tasha looked at him for a moment. She could see the sincerity in his eyes. She gave a small nod. "Next time, speak louder," she said. He nodded. "I will." As he turned and walked away, something inside her finally eased. Not because she got an apology, but because maybe, just maybe, this time something would change. That evening, the local news picked up the story. But what caught everyone's attention wasn't just that a break-in had been stopped. It was who had stopped it, and how. They showed a clip of Tasha at a community meeting later that week. She stood at the podium, strong and calm, her voice echoing through the small room. "I didn't ask to be a hero. I just asked to be heard. What happened to me happens to women like me all the time. Black women, who are too often seen as loud instead of alert, dramatic instead of concerned. But we see things. We know when something's wrong, so don't laugh next time. Listen." The room erupted in applause. And from that moment forward, they did. Weeks passed, and the memory of that night didn't fade. But something in the neighborhood, and beyond, began to shift. Tasha's story was shared online, picked up by news outlets, blogs, and even community advocacy groups. People reposted her words with hashtags like #BelieveBlackWomen and She tried to warn them. The incident sparked citywide conversations about how emergency calls were handled, especially when made by women of color. What began as a single ignored call had grown into a louder, more powerful voice for change. One afternoon, Tasha was invited to speak at a town hall. Not just as a witness, but as a leader. As she stood before the audience, a mix of community members, police officials, and city leaders, she took a deep breath and scanned the room. "I didn't stop a crime because I was brave," she began. "I stopped it because I was left no choice." The room was silent. "I did everything right. I saw danger. I called for help. But because of who I am, because of what I look like, I was laughed at, ignored, dismissed. It's not just disrespectful, it's dangerous." Some heads nodded, others lowered. "But I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for responsibility, for accountability, for the next Black woman who calls for help and deserves to be taken seriously." A city official stood after her and publicly announced new policies: mandatory bias training for dispatchers, new checks for 911 recordings, and a community oversight panel. It wasn't everything, but it was a start. After the meeting, people came up to Tasha one by one, young women, older men, other mothers, thanking her. Some shared their own stories of being ignored or overlooked. Tasha listened to each one, her heart both breaking and swelling with every word. Later that night, back on her front porch, she sipped her tea like she had on the night it all began. But this time, the neighborhood didn't feel so quiet. It felt aware. A neighbor waved from across the street. Kids rode their bikes again. Mrs. Thompson, now safe and well, had her porch light on brighter than ever. And for the first time in weeks, peace didn't feel like a lie. Tasha looked out into the fading light and whispered to herself, "They know who they're talking to now." Because this wasn't just about one night, or one crime, it was about all the time she wasn't heard, and finally was. And that, more than anything, was her greatest comeback. Would you like me to format this into a script next, or turn the full outline into a complete narrated story? The clip fades into quiet footage of Tasha walking through her neighborhood, holding her daughter's hand. Her head is held high, not out of pride, but out of purpose. The sun is setting again, just like the night it all began. But this time, the air feels different. Safer, still, voiceover narration style. Tasha never asked for attention, she didn't chase the spotlight. All she wanted was to do what was right. But when the world told her she was overreacting, she chose to trust her instincts. She chose to act anyway. What started as a single ignored call became a ripple, one that forced people to listen, to see, and to change. Not just in her neighborhood, but in the hearts of people everywhere, who've been silenced too many times. This story isn't about revenge. It's not even about justice. It's about the power of being heard. the strength of not backing down, and the quiet courage of a woman who knew her worth, even when others tried to laugh it away. They thought she was just a voice on the phone. Now they know better. Closing visual. Text fades onto the screen. Believe black women. Listen the first time, because silence costs more than we think. The neighborhood had gone back to normal, or at least something close to it. The kids played outside again. Neighbors waved more often. Even the street lights felt a little brighter. But inside Tasha, something had changed for good. She sat on her porch one evening, her daughter asleep inside, a warm cup of tea in her hands. The same porch where she once watched a stranger break into a home. The same porch where she had been ignored, doubted, and dismissed. But tonight, there was no fear in her chest. Only resolve. Tasha wasn't angry anymore. Not because she forgot what happened, but because anger wasn't going to fix it. What she carried now was determination. The quiet kind. The kind that didn't shout, but still stood tall. The kind that showed up every day, even when no one noticed. She knew change wouldn't happen overnight. The world didn't flip a switch because one woman stood up. But she also knew that every act of courage adds up. Every time someone speaks up, someone else listens. And one day, the voices grow too loud to ignore. Tasha didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a mother, a neighbor, a woman who did what she had to do, and would do it again. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. As a soft breeze rustled the leaves, she smiled faintly. Somewhere out there, another black woman was speaking up. Another voice was calling for help, demanding to be heard, and maybe, just maybe, the people on the other end were starting to listen. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes on the stars above. The fight wasn't over, but neither was her hope. And that, she knew, was more powerful than any laugh. If this story moved you, take a moment to like the video, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. Have you ever been ignored when you tried to speak up? Your voice matters here, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories that uncover the truth and remind us all why being heard is everything.